When a disgraced billionaire publicly humiliates the black woman he once abandoned, he doesn't realize the quiet 6-year-old beside her is his heir, or that the most feared man in Seoul has already chosen her as his wife. The chandelier above the Aurora Crown Ballroom cast its gold across everything it touched: the champagne flutes, the diamond earrings, the rehearsed smiles of Seoul's most powerful people. Everything in this room was designed to remind you of your place. Nia Williams knew hers. She stood at the far edge of the marble floor in a deep emerald gown, forest green bleeding into crimson at the hem, gold embroidery climbing her bodice like ivy on a cathedral wall. The dress was not borrowed. It was not rented. She had chosen every thread of it with the same quiet intention she brought to everything she built after the night someone tried to destroy her. Her back was straight. Her chin was level. Her hands did not shake, but her jaw was tight, because he was already looking at her. Min-soo Park hadn't changed. That was the cruelest thing about men like him. They never had to. He still wore money like a second skin, still tilted his head at that particular angle that said, "I already know how this ends." He was surrounded by 3 socialites who laughed before he finished his sentences. When his eyes found Nia across the ballroom, that laugh didn't stop. It sharpened. He crossed the room slowly, deliberately. He wanted an audience, and the audience obliged. Conversations dropped, glasses paused mid-sip, eyes slid sideways without heads turning. "Nia." He said her name the way someone identifies an insect. "I almost didn't recognize you. The dress is..." He tilted his head. His companion covered a smile. "Brave." The word landed the way he intended it to. Brave. Not beautiful. Not elegant. Brave. As in, it takes a certain audacity to show up somewhere you don't belong. "The last time I saw you in a uniform," he continued, his voice low enough to feel intimate, loud enough to carry, "you were mopping the east corridor of my family estate. 3rd floor. You used to hum while you worked. Do you remember that?" Nia said nothing. "You're here because of that nonprofit, yes? The one for housekeepers?" He smiled at his companion. "Domestic workers. Very noble." Back to Nia. "Tell me, does running a charity for maids feel full circle, given your history?" The room did not gasp. The room breathed. "There is a difference." A gasp would have broken the moment. Instead, the silence became a container, and every person in it leaned in. Nia looked at him. 6 years. 6 years since the night he had her escorted from the property with 1 month's severance in an envelope and nothing else. Not a coat, not an explanation, not even the dignity of a raised voice. He had done it quietly, the way powerful people dispose of inconveniences. She had stood in the snow outside the service entrance with her single bag and a secret she hadn't yet found words for, and she had made herself a promise: "You will not be cold forever." "Min-soo," she said at last, her voice measured and unhurried. "The dress cost more than your last watch." She let that breathe. "And the nonprofit has placed 912 women in legal employment contracts across 3 countries. You can Google the rest." A flicker crossed his face. Not shame. Men like him did not do shame in public. Something closer to recalculation. He opened his mouth. The ballroom doors opened first. Not a knock. Not an announcement. Both doors, simultaneously, swung inward with the kind of authority that doesn't need to announce itself. The music didn't stop. But the musicians faltered, a half-beat of hesitation that anyone paying attention would notice. Everyone was paying attention. A small hand appeared first. 5 fingers curled around one large one, a navy blue sleeve ending at a small wrist, a boy in a perfectly fitted suit who walked with the gravity of someone 3 times his age, 6 years old perhaps. Dark eyes scanning the room with calm assessment. A face that Min-soo Park's breath audibly caught. Because that face, that jaw, those eyes, that particular angle of the brow. Behind the boy, a man in black. Not a tuxedo. Not the performative formal wear of the other men in this room. a fitted black suit with no tie, collar open at the throat revealing the edge of something inked at his collarbone. He was not the tallest man in the room, but he made every other man look temporary. His face was still, not blank. Still, the way deep water is still. The kind of stillness that has made decisions. Ryujin Kang moved through the crowd without touching anyone. The crowd moved for him, unconsciously, the way crowds have always moved for things they instinctively understand to be immovable. He did not look at Minsu Park. He looked only at Nia. He walked directly to her, reached her in 7 steps, and without a word, lifted the black coat from his arm and placed it around her shoulders. The gesture was not rushed. It was not theatrical. It was the gesture of a man returning something that belonged to him, or rather, recognizing something that had always belonged to itself, and simply choosing to stand beside it. Then he looked up, at the room, at the man still standing 3 feet away with a champagne flute loose in his fingers and a color draining from his face that all the money and soul could not restore. "Why?" Ryujin said, quiet, precise, carrying the way a single note carries in a concert hall. "Is my wife being entertained without me?" The word wife did not echo. It didn't need to. It simply remained in the air, solid and irrefutable, while the entire Aurora Crown Ballroom held its breath, and Nia Williams, who had rebuilt herself from a snowstorm, who had never once asked to be rescued, felt the ground shift beneath 6 years of carefully constructed certainty. The boy looked up at her. His small hand tightened in Ryujin's. Minsu Park looked at the child. And for the first time in his life, the most powerful word in the room wasn't money. It wasn't family. It wasn't legacy. It was a 6-year-old boy's face, wearing his features like an inheritance he had thrown away. What happens when the man who abandoned you in the cold discovers the empire that rose in his absence and the iron wall that was built around everything he surrendered? Nia didn't come to this ballroom for revenge. She came because she had earned her seat. But the night was only beginning. Continue watching, because what Ryujin knows, what Minsu is about to lose, and what Nia is only now beginning to understand will change everything you thought you knew about power, protection, and the difference between being saved and being chosen. He did not rush. That was the first thing Nia noticed. The absolute absence of urgency in the way Ryujin Kang moved through the ballroom. Every other man who had ever tried to assert himself in a room like this had done it with volume, with speed, with the restless energy of someone performing confidence they weren't entirely sure they possessed. Ryujin walked the way tides moved, slowly, inevitably, and with the quiet understanding that the shore had no real say in the matter. He guided her with a hand at the small of her back, not gripping, not steering, present. The boy walked on her other side, his small fingers still wrapped in hers, and Nia registered distantly that she had taken his hand without deciding to. The way you reach for something solid when the ground moves. Minsu had not spoken again. He stood where she had left him, champagne flute still suspended at a useless angle, his face cycling through calculations she could almost read. Coincidence, rival, performance, threat. His gaze kept returning to the boy. Kept sliding away. Kept returning. Ryujin stopped once. He turned his head. Not his body, just his head. And looked at Minsu with the unhurried attention of a man reviewing something he already owns. "Mr. Park." His voice was conversational. Pleasantly so. "I've been meaning to speak with you about your Q3 board position." He didn't wait for a response. He turned back and continued walking. His assistant, a lean man in a charcoal suit who had materialized at the edge of the room, moved to the main AV console with the efficiency of someone who had done this before, in other ballrooms, in other cities, on other nights when his employer had decided that a particular truth needed light. The projector above the east wall flickered to life. Numbers first. Transfer records, corporate acquisition filings, legal restructuring documents bearing the stamp of 3 separate holding companies, each of which, if you trace the architecture far enough back, led to the same signature. The same name, Ryu Jin Kong. 42% controlling interest, effective 14 months ago. The ballroom absorbed this the way expensive rooms absorb scandals, quietly, with perfect posture, while every mind in it detonated privately. Nia heard someone whisper a number, heard another voice repeat it an octave higher. Min-soo Park's name rippled through the crowd in hushed fragments, and for the first time tonight, it did not carry the weight it usually did. Ryu Jin did not look at the screen. He already knew what was on it. Min-soo tried to take a breath, but his lungs refused. He looked at the massive projector screen detailing his total financial ruin. Then his eyes snapped back to the 6-year-old boy in the navy suit, the son he had thrown into the freezing snow 6 years ago. The heir he had discarded, now standing completely untouchable behind a wall of lethal power. His legs simply stopped working. It wasn't a choice. It was the total physical collapse of a man who realized he had just lost his empire, his legacy, and his future in the exact same 60 seconds. Min-soo Park hit the marble floor. Hard. He dropped straight to his knees in the dead center of the Aurora Crown Ballroom. The crystal champagne flute slipped from his numb fingers, shattering violently across the polished stone. The gasp the room had been holding back finally broke. Min-soo looked up at Nia. The arrogant mask he had worn his entire life was completely gone, leaving only naked, pathetic panic. He was no longer the billionaire in the bespoke tuxedo. He was a broken man begging at the feet of the woman he once called a maid. "Nia," he choked out, his voice cracking, thick with tears in front of Seoul's elite. "Please, the boy. My company. Nia, please." Ryu Jin didn't even blink. He looked down at the sobbing, broken billionaire kneeling at his wife's feet, with the cold detachment of a man observing trash on the sidewalk. "I dislike public disrespect," he said to no one in particular, to everyone present, to Min-soo Park specifically. The sentence required no decoration. He placed it in the room like a stone placed on a table, solid, without ceremony. And then he walked Nia through the ballroom doors and into the corridor beyond, and the doors swung closed behind them, and the night outside was quiet and cold and full of stars. She didn't speak in the elevator. He didn't try to fill the silence. The penthouse was on the 43rd floor, and the ride took 47 seconds. And in those 47 seconds, Nia stood with her arms crossed and her eyes fixed on the middle distance, and her mind doing something she rarely allowed it to do, reaching backward. The boy had been taken by a woman Ryu Jin called Mrs. O, a soft-spoken woman in her 50s, who had clearly done this before, who had produced warm milk and a specific stuffed animal from a bag Nia had not seen her carrying, and who had disappeared with him down a corridor with the practiced invisibility of someone trusted completely. Nia had watched her son go without, to be in protest. That too unsettled her. The fact that he had gone easily, the fact that he had looked comfortable, as though some part of him already knew this place. The elevator doors opened onto a room that was mostly glass. Seoul spread below like a circuit board, every light a decision someone had made. The penthouse itself was minimal. Dark wood, clean lines, one bookshelf covering an entire wall. No art except for a single ink painting above the fireplace, brushstroke mountains dissolving into mist. The kind of room that had been designed by someone who understood that the city outside was already the spectacle, and that everything inside should simply be still. Nia turned around. Ryu Jin was already watching her. He had removed his jacket. His sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and the ink at his collarbone continued down his left forearm in patterns she didn't try to read. He stood with his hands in his pockets and his weight distributed evenly, the posture of a man who was not bracing for anything because he had already decided how this conversation would go. She had not decided that. She hadn't decided anything since the doors had opened. "The marriage certificate," she said. Not a question. "Is legal. Filed 9 months ago in Seoul District Court under a joint protection agreement. I didn't sign a joint protection agreement. You signed a foundation legal consolidation document in March. Page 7, subsection 4. Your lawyer at the time missed it. He paused. I did not. The heat that moved through her was not entirely anger, which made the anger worse. You buried a marriage contract in my nonprofit paperwork. I buried a protection order in your nonprofit paperwork, he said, and his voice did not change. The marriage was the mechanism. The protection was the point. That is not a distinction that makes this better. No, he agreed. It isn't. She waited for him to apologize. He didn't. She studied his face for the flinch of a man who knew he had overstepped and was managing the fallout. She didn't find it. What she found instead was something more complicated. A steadiness that was not indifference, an attention that was not performance. He was watching her the way people watch things they have thought about for a long time finally move in real space. Why tonight? She asked. Why reveal it now, in that room, in front of all those people? Because Minsu's legal team filed an emergency petition for paternity access last Tuesday, he said. They intended to serve you at the gala, public location, press presence, maximum humiliation, minimum ability to refuse without spectacle. I moved first. The room was very quiet. He knew, she said. His mother has known for 2 years. She hired investigators 18 months after you left. Once she confirmed the boy's bloodline, she began building a custody case. Not for love of a grandchild. His voice was even, but something in it thinned slightly. The first hairline fracture she had seen in that composure. For legacy management, the park name, the inheritance optics. He is the only male heir of that bloodline, and they lost him before they knew he existed. Nia sat down. Not because she was weak, because she needed the floor to be reliable. 6 years of building, 6 years of waking before dawn and writing grant proposals and training caseworkers and believing that if she just kept moving forward, the past could not catch her legs. And all along, somewhere in a filed folder in a law office she had never visited, her son's face had been documented, measured, assessed for value. You should have told me. Her voice was quiet and absolute. Yes, he said. Don't agree with me like that makes it acceptable. It doesn't make it acceptable. You asked why I didn't tell you. The answer is that your foundation's early donor network had 2 compromised members with Park family ties. Any communication that reached them would have reached her. Made a calculation. You made a calculation about my life. I made a calculation to protect your son's life. The fracture in his voice sealed itself. You can be angry at the method. You are right to be. But I will not apologize for the outcome. She stood. The coat he had placed on her shoulders fell to the chair behind her, and she let it. I built everything I have from nothing. From one bag in the snow and a secret I was terrified of, and a number for a women's shelter I almost called 4 times. I did not survive that night so that someone else could manage my future without consulting me. I am not a variable in someone else's equation. The words were not loud. They were the words of someone who had rehearsed them in some form for years without knowing what audience they were waiting for. Ryujin did not move. His expression did not perform sympathy. He looked at her the way people look at something they recognize, not because it is familiar, but because it is true. I know, he said. Don't. I know because I have watched you for 6 years, and in 6 years you have not once waited to be rescued. You did not call the shelter. You found a legal aid clinic by yourself. You secured the first grant by yourself. You hired your first caseworker, trained her, lost her to a better funded organization, and hired 2 more. You built 912 employment contracts, and you did it without asking anyone to believe in you first. He paused. I did not interfere with any of that. I removed obstacles. There is a difference. She stared at him. 3 of your early grant applications were rejected by foundations that had received quiet communication suggesting your organization was financially unstable. I corrected that communication. One of your caseworkers was approached by a park-affiliated NGO and offered 3 times her salary to leave and take your donor list with her. The offer was withdrawn. Your foundation's first international partnership was stalled for 11 months in regulatory review. It was unstalled. He held her gaze. I did not build your foundation, Nia. I cleared the floor so you could. The silence between them was different now. Not softer exactly, more honest. Why? She asked, and the word came out smaller than she intended. He was quiet for a moment, the first real pause she had gotten from him all night. Because of the way you stood in the snow, he said finally. She didn't understand. He continued. I found you on the night he threw you out. You were outside the service entrance. It was below zero, and you had one bag, and you were bleeding from where you had fallen on the ice, and you were not crying. He said this plainly, without weight, as though reporting something he had memorized a long time ago. You were standing completely still with your eyes closed, and I thought you had lost consciousness standing up. But then I watched you breathe. One breath, deliberately, all the way in, all the way out, and open your eyes, and pick up your bag, and start walking. She remembered that breath. She had not known anyone was watching. I had a car bring you to a private clinic. I paid for everything under a corporate account and left before you woke. I didn't intend anything past that night. A pause. But I checked on the clinic discharge, then on the address you gave them, then on the name of the organization you registered 4 months later. The faintest shift in his expression. Not quite a smile, but the country adjacent to one. You named it groundwork. I thought that was either the most hopeful thing I had ever heard or the most stubborn. Possibly both. Nia looked at her own hands. She had named it groundwork because she had nothing left but the ground, because building anything required starting at the bottom, and she had decided, in the snow, in the cold, with one deliberate breath, that she would not be ashamed of where she started. You should have introduced yourself, she said. Her voice was different now, not softer. Stripped of the performance of anger, which was all that was left when the anger itself had run out of fuel. You would have refused the help. She didn't answer because they both knew he was right. I kept my distance because your independence was not a flaw to be managed. It was the entire point of you. He said this without sentimentality, as a statement of observed fact. And then, the Park family began to move, and distance became a liability I couldn't afford. She walked to the window. Below, Seoul continued its electric indifference, 43 floors of city between her and the marble ballroom where a man had mocked her dress and a child had walked through the doors and changed everything. The boy, she said quietly. Jae-won, he wasn't... You didn't tell him anything tonight. He just walked in like he knew where he was going. He has been here before, Ryujin said. 3 times. Mrs. O arranged it. He thought he was visiting a friend of yours. She turned. You met my son. He beat me at every card game he proposed, he said, and this time the almost smile became briefly, unmistakably real. He cheats. I respect it. Nia looked at him across the room. This man who had found her in the cold and never announced it, who had cleared floors she thought she was clearing alone, who had married her on paper to protect her custody of a child he had met 3 times and already admired, who had walked into a ballroom and placed a coat around her shoulders like a flag planted in ground he had been standing on for years without claiming. She had spent 6 years learning to need no one. She had spent 6 years being, without knowing it, someone's quiet priority. I'm not going to thank you, she said. I didn't ask you to. And I'm not going to pretend tonight resolves anything. There are conversations we have not had. There are decisions you made that we will revisit. Yes. And I will not be managed. Not by Min-soo, not by his mother, not by whatever this is. She gestured between them. The apartment, the contract, the 6 years of silent architecture. I run my own foundation. I raise my own son. Those facts are not negotiable. I know, he said. Stop agreeing with me. I agree with you because you're right. He tilted his head slightly. I am not interested in your compliance, Nia. I am interested in you. There is a significant difference. She held his gaze for a long moment. Outside, the city hummed its constant voltage. The coat lay on the chair behind her, still holding the shape of his hands. She did not pick it up. Not yet. But she did not walk toward the elevator either. "Tell me about Minsu's mother," she said finally. "Tell me everything she filed, and then tell me what you're planning." Ryujin moved to the bookshelf, pulled out a folder, and set it on the low table between them without triumph, without theater, with the simple efficiency of a man who had been waiting a long time to finally be in the same room as his equal. "Everything," he said, "from the beginning." And for the first time since the ballroom doors had opened, Nia Williams sat down not because the ground was moving, but because she had chosen to. The petition was 12 pages long. Nia read every word of it sitting at Ryujin's kitchen table at 2 in the morning with a cup of tea she had made herself because she needed something to do with her hands. The legal language was clean and bloodless, the way all instruments of cruelty are clean and bloodless when they are expensive enough. It alleged financial instability. It questioned the suitability of a single mother running a high-demand nonprofit as a primary caregiver. It referenced, in one particularly precise paragraph, an unspecified incident of emotional distress in the subject's early employment history, her time in the Park household, translated into clinical language, used now as a weapon by the same family that caused it. She set the papers down and pressed her fingers flat against the table. Ryujin was across from her, reading something on his phone, giving her the silence she needed without announcing that he was giving it to her. "She's not doing this for love of him," Nia said. "No. She wants the heir. The bloodline. Something to leverage against Minsu's declining board position." She looked up. "She'd raise my son as a corporate asset." That is the accurate read. Nia was quiet for a moment. Then, "What do you have on the DNA?" "A verified independent lab result, collected 14 months ago from a water glass at a public event Minsu attended. Chain of custody is documented. It is, legally, airtight." She studied him. "You've been building this case for over a year." "I have been building it since the day I confirmed his mother had opened an investigation. And you never came to me." "And I never came to you," he repeated, not as agreement this time, but as acknowledgement, the distinction she had asked him to honor. "That decision is mine to carry. I have already said so." She picked up the papers again. Not because she hadn't absorbed them, because some part of her needed the weight of them in her hands while she made the next decision. "Release the DNA results," she said. "Not through lawyers. Publicly, before they can control the narrative." He looked at her for a moment with that same unhurried attention. Then he picked up his phone. By morning, Minsu Park's name was everywhere, and none of it was kind. The DNA results had been filed with Seoul Family Court and simultaneously transmitted to 3 independent press contacts. Not tabloids, not gossip channels, but the kind of financial journalists who covered inheritance law and corporate succession, who understood exactly what an illegitimate heir meant for a conglomerate already wobbling under a CEO whose board had been quietly losing faith for 2 years. The story was not sensational. It was structural. That made it worse for him. Minsu went to press first. He called it a fabrication, a scheme. He used the word manipulation 3 times in 4 sentences, and every time he used it, the journalists who had already seen the documentation noted that he had not once used the word false. His mother said nothing publicly. That silence was its own kind of answer. By mid-morning, 2 board members had requested an emergency shareholders meeting. By afternoon, 3 more had joined the request. The meeting was scheduled for 48 hours out, and Minsu Park spent those 48 hours doing what men like him do when the architecture of their life begins to crack. He filed counter motions, he made calls, he attempted to locate pressure points in people who turned out to have already chosen their positions. One of those people was a senior family court judge named Han Soo-yeon. She had appeared in the 3rd row of a groundwork fundraising dinner 14 months ago, on the arm of a colleague, having heard of the foundation from a journalist who had covered its first international placement. After dinner, she had found Naya, introduced herself, and said simply, "What you are doing matters. If I can ever be useful, I would like to be." Nia had thanked her and filed the card and not called, because asking judges for favors was not how she intended to build anything. She had not needed to call. When the Park family's legal team approached Judge Han through an intermediary and suggested that the case might benefit from a particular judicial assignment, Judge Han reported the contact to the Court Oversight Board before the intermediary had finished speaking. Within 12 hours, the story of an attempted corruption approach in a high-profile custody case had added a new dimension to an already burning news cycle, and Min-soo Park's legal team issued a statement clarifying that the contact had been made without authorization in a sentence that convinced no one and satisfied no one and accelerated everything. Nia heard about Judge Han's report from Ryu Jin, who heard about it the moment it was filed. She sat with it for a long time before she said anything. "I didn't ask her for that." "No," Ryujin said. "You didn't." "I didn't even know she was still following the Foundation's work." 912 women, he said. People remember the things that changed their understanding of what was possible. She looked out the window at the city and thought about all the things you build without knowing who is watching. The grant proposals you write at midnight. The caseworker you train over 3 weeks, and lose to a better salary and train again. The woman you place in her first legal employment contract who cries in your office and says, "No one has ever helped me like this," and you tell her, "That's exactly why we exist. You build it because it is necessary. You do not build it to be remembered." And then, sometimes, the memory returns to you precisely when you need it. The shareholder meeting was held in the Park Group's glass tower on the 41st floor, and it had been designed by Min-soo's team as a damage control exercise. A controlled room, familiar faces, the comfortable machinery of institutional loyalty. He arrived early. He sat at the head of the table. He arranged his materials with the focused calm of a man rehearsing confidence. Ryujin arrived 7 minutes late. He did not apologize for this. He sat in the chair that had been placed, somewhat optimistically, in the observer section, and he set nothing on the table, and he did not open a laptop or consult notes, because everything he needed, he already knew. The meeting opened. The chair moved through procedure. 2 board members raised the question of leadership confidence. Min-soo prepared his response, the one he had practiced, the one about continuity and institutional knowledge and the regrettable distraction of personal matters that had been taken deliberately out of context. "I'd like to call for a confidence vote," Ryu Jin said. He said it the way he said everything, without volume, without theater, with the simple weight of a man who knew exactly what 42% of a company felt like in a room. The chair looked at him, looked at the procedural calendar, looked at the proxy documents Ryujin's assistant had filed, correctly and completely, 10 days prior. The vote took 11 minutes. When the numbers were read, Min-soo Park's hands were flat on the table, and he was looking at a point on the far wall with the fixed attention of a man preventing himself from doing something he would regret. His title was suspended pending a formal review. His access codes would be revoked before he reached the lobby. His bank accounts, tied to corporate operations, were frozen under the restructuring provisions that Ryu Jin's legal team had prepared with the care and patience of people who had been planning this for a long time. He looked at Ryu Jin once, just once. Ryu Jin looked back. Nothing in his expression was triumphant. There was no performance of victory, no satisfaction displayed for the room. He simply met Min-soo's eyes with the same steadiness he brought to everything, and in that steadiness was a message that required no translation. This was never about you. This was always about her. Min-soo Park looked away first. She was waiting in the lobby when Ryu Jin came down. She had not been invited to the meeting. She had not asked to attend. She had dropped Jaewon with Mrs. O that morning and driven herself to the tower and sat in the lobby with the coffee she didn't drink and the folder of documents she had read so many times the creases had gone soft, and she had waited because some things you need to witness even from a distance. When the elevator doors opened and he walked out, she read the answer in his posture before he said a word. The quiet evenness of a completed task. The particular stillness of someone who has spent a long time moving towards something and has arrived. He stopped when he saw her. Something moved behind his eyes. Surprise, and beneath the surprise, something that was not surprise at all. She stood. "It's done?" she asked. "It's done." Around them the lobby moved. Security personnel, assistants, two journalists who had been waiting outside and had now spotted them through the glass and were reaching for phones. The world was going to have opinions about this. It was going to have photographs and headlines and analysis and commentary, and none of that could be controlled, and Nia had decided that morning in the car that she was finished trying to control how the world narrated her. She had a son. She had a foundation. She had 912 women in legal employment contracts, and a judge who had reported a bribe on her behalf without being asked, and a man standing in front of her who had found her in the snow and spent 6 years quietly clearing the floor. She stepped forward and held out her hand. Not for a handshake. Palm up. An offering and a question at the same time. He looked at it. Then he looked at her. "I meant what I said," she told him. "I run my own foundation. I raise my own son. Those things don't change." "I know. And there are still conversations we have not had, about the marriage, about what you built without telling me, about what any of this looks like going forward." She kept her voice even and her hand extended. "I'm not forgiving the method. I'm choosing the direction." He reached out and took her hand. His grip was steady and unhurried, the same as everything else about him. "I don't need you to forgive the method," he said. "I need you to trust the man." "I know," she said. "That's why I'm still here." Outside, the photographers raised their cameras, and the light through the glass tower's walls fell on both of them. Equal, clean, without shadow. And, for the first time in 6 years, Nia Williams did not adjust her expression for anyone watching. Min-Soo Park issued a public apology 3 weeks later. It was drafted by a crisis PR firm and ran in 2 papers and 4 digital outlets, and it said all the correct things in all the correct order and convinced no one of anything, but it existed, and its existence was its own kind of defeat. He did not name her specifically. He did not need to. Everyone who read it knew exactly who had brought him to his knees, and it was not the man with 42% of his company. It was the woman he had mocked in an emerald dress while a ballroom full of witnesses watched and said nothing. She did not respond to it publicly. She released a foundation press statement the same week announcing Groundwork's expansion into 2 new countries and the hiring of a regional director for Southeast Asia. The statement included no reference to the Park family, no language of triumph or reclamation, just the work. The relentless, accumulating, entirely unglamorous work of building something that mattered, laid out in clear language for anyone who wanted to understand what she had been doing all along. The response was considerable. Jae-won, for his part, understood very little of what had happened and cared about less of it. He understood that the tall man with the ink on his arm made very good ramyeon at odd hours of the night and lost at every card game with suspicious consistency. He understood that his mother laughed differently in this apartment than she laughed in their own, lighter, less guarded, the laugh of someone who had set something heavy down. He understood that when he asked one afternoon whether the man was going to live with them, his mother looked out the window for a moment before she answered, and when she turned back, there was something in her face that he did not have a word for yet, but that felt, even to a 6-year-old, like something being decided. "We're figuring it out," she told him. He accepted this with the philosophical calm of a child who cheats at cards and knows everything comes out right eventually. That night, after Jae-won was asleep, Nia stood at the penthouse window with the city spread below her, and Ryu-jin stood beside her, and neither of them felt the need to speak. They had said what needed saying. They were still in the middle of it. The trust still being built. The wounds still being understood. the architecture of something real still being laid out brick by deliberate brick. But she was not afraid of middle things anymore. She had learned, in the snow, in the cold, with one breath taken deliberately all the way in and all the way out, that the middle of a thing is exactly where the work happens, and she had never been afraid of work. They once threw her into the cold. Now the world warmed at her side. If Nia's story moved something in you, if you've ever had to rebuild from a moment someone else created, or if you've ever stood in a room where you knew you belonged even when the room hadn't caught up yet, then you already understand what this story is really about. It's not about revenge. It's not about the man who knelt. It's about the breath you take in the snow when no one is watching. The foundation you name groundwork because all you have left is the ground. The quiet, relentless choice to keep walking when every reason to stop feels easier. Hit the like button if Nia deserved every moment of that ballroom. Drop a comment and tell me, which scene hit you the hardest? And if you're new here, subscribe, because this channel is built for people who love stories where the strength was there all along. More is coming. Don't miss it.